better known as Fluency MC. So happy to be here with you, whether you're here live, hello, you're watching the recording afterwards, whether you're a new teacher, an experienced teacher, an old teacher like myself, thanks for joining us. And this month, the topic is something that many teachers request help with, and understandably so, and many students I benefit from if their teachers are prepared, because test take preparation and test taking can be very stressful, also very tedious, and I think the combination of tedium and stress can really kill both a student's motivation and a teacher's motivation, preparing students for tests. And when I say tests, we're going to focus on standardized tests. We'll get into that momentarily. But before we start, as always, this presentation will take into account people who have really never prepared students for tests, people who have done it and but struggle in certain ways. And yeah, I love teaching test prep, and maybe it sounds crazy, but for me, it's an opportunity because of the potential to feel stressed and be bored. The flip side of that is, the challenge, which I love, of helping students relax and making it more fun, interesting. I love situations with teaching where traditionally they're boring and stressful, because I think that's where we have such great opportunity to be creative and do fun things. And along the way, I will explain more about that. And I personally have been teaching test prep, TOEFL, TOEIC, all the ETS tests, all the Cambridge tests, and others for many, many, many years. And it's one of my passions. So if hopefully I can at least make it a little less tedious and boring for you and your students. So here are my top 10 tips for us English teachers preparing students for standardized tests. As I said, we're going to focus on 3 of them. So as you finish reading this, I'll tell you those 3 are the TOEIC, the TOEFL, that are given by the Educational Testing Service, ETS, based in the United States, and the IELTS, which is Cambridge University Press, and that's based in the UK. So the TOEIC, you don't need to be familiar with these tests, deeply familiar with them, or even moderately familiar with them, just a little bit familiar with them, so we can use them as examples. So focusing on these 3 tests because they are so common, popular for English language students, whether it's for a job like the TOEIC. TOEIC also in some countries, like where I am in France, as a measure of B2 level, for example, to get a diploma as a university student. And then 2 academic tests, the TOEFL and Cambridge IELTS, as I said. So the most important thing is just that I'm going the wrong way here. So the most important thing is just that you are familiar enough so that when I'm talking about those tips, which can be used for any sort of test preparation, and doesn't have to necessarily be a standardized test prep, or even maybe test prep. It could be certain things for assignments and just general English language teaching as well. But at any rate, this is the TOEIC, 7 parts, 2 sections, listening and reading. There is a speaking and writing TOEIC that almost nobody takes. Few people even know about it. I imagine that in the future they may make it a 4-skill test, but for the moment it's still mainly paper-based and listening and reading only. I am also shameless promotion here very quickly. So this is not affiliated with American TESOL Institute, but I do have my own TOEIC program. So if you are interested, let me know. But I love making materials for test preparation, and I love sharing them with anyone who is a part of the American Language Institute. I'm happy to send this presentation as a PDF to anyone. You just need to send me an email. My email is support@fluencymc.com. Once again, support@fluencymc.com, and I'll mention it several other times as we go along. And also, if you have questions, those of you here live, chat, thank you, and you're welcome to stay at the end for a little Q&A. We'll just stop the recording and continue here live. So yes, the TOEIC, we're going to talk about the TOEFL, which changed about a year and a half ago. It's shorter now. So if you're familiar with sort of the old TOEFL, which had been the same for many, many years, you could look at the bottom here and see it's under 2 hours. Now they shortened the reading session considerably. That's the main difference, and some other changes. So we're going to talk about, but you don't need to know the minutes and the number of questions, just that we're going to talk about the TOEIC, which is business English focused, the TOEFL, and then the IELTS, which is direct competition with TOEFL. This is a Cambridge test, also 4 skills like the TOEFL. TOEIC and TOEFL sound so similar, and I teach both of them, so I often make the mistake. I usually catch myself. So yes, IELTS and TOEFL are academic tests, although there is a general IELTS, but the one that is well, they're both popular, but yeah, the academic one is the one that's more similar to the TOEFL. And universities usually look for one of those 2 tests for studying abroad and for mainly for that. So the top 10 tips, which you saw earlier in a slide, we're going to go to our first one now, and that's know the test inside out. So I always start by talking to students about the fact that when they take a test in their first language, it's about their ability in their first language and their intelligence and other things, and it's also about knowing the type of test and strategies for the test. Well, if it's in a foreign language, your second language, then it's measuring your ability in a language you are not as comfortable with during a test. So this is where the stress can come in, which makes it much, much more important to know the test. So, for example, if you are taking the SAT as a native speaker of English, you're probably thinking much more about the content at first than you are about how the test is organized and so forth. They're both important, but when you're talking about one of these tests, and when English is a foreign language or a second language, then it becomes even more important to know how the test is created, what the test is going to ask. So I'm going to read this because it's just so important, and you can use it with your students if you like. Imagine you're driving a car for the very first time. Will you turn on the radio? Will you think about what you're going to have for lunch? Can you have a playful conversation with the person next to you? Any distraction can cause you to lose focus. You need to concentrate on where to look, how hard to press down on the gas pedal, etc. Now, imagine you have years of experience driving a car. You no longer have to be as conscious of what you're doing. Most of it happens automatically. As a result, you can focus on other things happening around you. When you take a test in English, you need to focus on test material in another language. If you also have to think about the structure and format of the test, for example, what to do in a particular part, what types of questions are coming next, you will lose focus and your score will be lower than it should be. You will lose focus and you will be more stressed. So hopefully when I was explaining the situation in driving a car, you think of stress too. I don't know why I didn't mention the word stress here. I usually do. But this is what we talk when we're talking about the difference between declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge, or declarative learning and procedural learning, right? So declarative is that idea of you need to be conscious, and procedural is when it becomes automatic. It's always important to have procedural competence when you're taking a test, but even more so when you take a test in another language. And here's the thing, and if you're an experienced teacher with test prep, you know this. A student can have a very, very strong level of English, but perform low on one of these tests because the student doesn't know the test inside out. Also, the reverse can happen, right? Where a student whose English, and this is very important, whose English is not that strong, can still do pretty well because they know the test so well. And that's a really important thing when it comes to strategy. So how do you get to know a test inside out? Well, the TOEIC, they give you this handbook. That's a PDF, you can download it. But the thing is, and here again is the difference when it's a foreign language, is a student going to really read this and feel comfortable with it and know what to do with the knowledge here? Not necessarily. Moreover, there's not that much information here. And we need to talk about why that is, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. So one thing you can do as a teacher to help students really know the test is make a kind of game. Well, this isn't a game. I have a game coming, like a true false, for example, activity. So this one is for the TOEIC. And I did this using the information from the book. So instead of saying, okay, read this handbook, I said, okay, read the handbook, but here's what we're going to do in class. And that way, if the students don't read it, then they're getting it in an activity, or even better, I have games for TOEIC and TOEFL, not for IELTS. I need to make one. I'll show you how you can also access them. So TOEIC preparation tests, where I'm putting in things about the test. So know the TOEIC inside out. It doesn't have test questions. It has those true false questions and other questions to help students really get to know the test, because you can't go any further, in my opinion, without knowing the test. So this is Bamboozle. This is not a endorsement, paid endorsement. I love this platform. My friend started it, but it's totally free to join. So if you want to join and you want to follow what I do here or access my test, you can just look for my profile. So just go to Bamboozle. I'll show you that again, bamboozle.com. And then you can find my games, and you can just do a search for TOEIC or TOEFL. So another problem is answer keys, at least for answer sheets. This is for the TOEIC. And so it's a little TOEIC heavy, this part of the presentation, but you'll see some TOEFL and IELTS materials coming. But if it's a paper-based test or a computer test, whatever test it is, they need to be super familiar with how to put their answers in. So one of the problems that I faced with these paper-based answer sheets, this one for TOEIC and the one for TOEFL, is that when I looked at this, I can see the different parts of the test. But students, that's because I've just been doing it so many years. So I'm like the person driving the car where everything is procedural now. How can I get my students in that situation, like me? So I created this, something I'm happy to share with you because I have my name all over it. It's Fluent CMC here. And I think Jason R. Levine is somewhere also, or anyway. So yeah, this is something I created to show the different parts of the test. And I have this also for TOEFL. I don't have it yet for Cambridge tests. But this is what I see, and I want my students to see when they look at this answer sheet. They should know, right, where the parts of the test are, because back to just what we talked about earlier, just a few moments ago, about knowing the test, but also because then you can build strategy. How can students really know what strategies to use in each part of the test if they don't even have, if they don't have an automatic connection with how many questions there are, where they are, what happens in those parts of the test. And even if they say they do, that could be that declarative knowledge. Okay, yeah, I know the test, but do you really know the test inside out? So, TOEFL, they give you an information bulletin, right? So you can, this is the new one. So that's similar to the TOEIC. So you definitely want to, the IELTS, it's a guide for teachers, for students. Cambridge is much, much better at providing information to teachers and to students. And I'll explain why. This is what I said earlier about why it's important to really know the tests and what you may have to do on your own if you're not getting all of the information you need from the companies themselves, which you won't. We'll talk about why that is. Oh, here we are. So those guides I just show you, they may have a few questions in them, practice questions, but not much, right? It's more about what the test consists of, a few sample questions, and then, logistic stuff like, how to register and how to put information on the answer sheets and things like this. So, authentic preparation materials. What does that mean? It may seem straightforward. However, it's not, especially in the case of certain tests. The TOEIC is the most obvious one, where there are many books out there, online programs, apps that are saying they are TOEIC preparation, and they may even have the ETS logo on them, meaning they're endorsed by ETS. However, the truth is, ETS does not want a lot of authentic material out there. So they're happier to endorse poor materials. They don't want to give away too much about this test. And that's why you will see a lot of black market TOEIC material out there. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means you need to guide your students carefully. Find out which programs, which books, which apps are better than others, because the difference is enormous. I'm happy to help you with that specifically if you email me to send you links and things. But it's also, yeah, to understand how important this is, because there are certain, I won't mention any names, but there are certain books and platforms, online learning platforms, that say they're TOEIC or TOEFL, especially TOEIC, TOEFL. And if this is the test, they're kind of taking you this way, as opposed to others. So what you want, number one, is to get as much real, that's what I mean by authentic, from the test makers themselves, as much as you can, material from them directly. So let's look at that. So the Cambridge is really good with this, because they also make money from publishing books. They're university press, so that helps support Cambridge University Press. Furthermore, they are not as for profit. I say as for profit because technically speaking, ETS is a nonprofit, but in reality, right? They are much freer with their materials. So you can and you can get things for materials for, it's not so expensive, right? So they're pretty affordable. Yeah, lots of good IELTS stuff is available. One of the reasons why, if someone says TOEFL or IELTS, well, TOEFL IBT, not so bad. If it's TOEFL ITP, which is the institutional TOEFL, you've got a problem again where there's not a lot of good material. There's some. TOEFL IBT, there's more. And one reason, I think, is because it's a much harder test. So ETS is a little freer with the materials. But you will have to pay, right? They don't, as far as I know, they don't have they do have the official guide, yeah, but you have to pay for it, right? So they do have some free online practice, but it's pretty limited. I think there are some free materials from other companies? I have to check. I'm hesitating because I know they come and go. But I can look into that for you. There are some good websites with good materials. But then yeah, you can pay for these. So yeah, TOEFL has much more material available than TOEIC. In fact, TOEIC, you can tell just by the cover of this free thing here, and then these sample tests, right? It's very minimal. They don't have an official guide anymore. And you can sometimes get to this point, contact EPN and find this. The interesting thing is you don't always see it. I don't want to get into the specifics too much and take up too much time here. So if you're interested in TOEIC preparation, contact me. I can try to help you find this, which is great stuff, including listening materials. It's a little pricey, but there's a lot of good material. The problem is it's sometimes there and sometimes not. So, authentic materials, you try to get as many as you can. There are certain parts of tests, like this is a good example from the IELTS, where you may be able to create your own materials pretty easily, or even use authentic materials from outside the test world, which is what I want to show you. So there's the graph part of the academic writing task on IELTS. We'll talk later about making a template for students to help them answer these questions. But it's reading a graph. So one cool thing is the Financial Times, which also is from the UK, so it's kind of cool, kind of jibes with the Cambridge stuff. But if you look down here, there's a graph every day in the briefing section, and I zoomed in on it. It's really bad quality, but just so you can see. So newspaper like that and other places you can find graphs, and that's an example. You can basically make something yourself, or look for things online that are similar without paying for them. So that's the important things you do. Just for certain parts of tests, you really don't want to use material if it's not similar enough to the real test. Which reminds me, if you can take the test, take it. Depending where you are, if it costs too much or it's not available, I understand. But yeah, if you can take the test yourself, that's something that I haven't done recently, but I've done many times in the past. Really, really makes a difference. Tip number 3, and if I'm going too fast, questions at the end, or again, you can email me for the PDF. There's a part at the end with a lot of text, and that's not meant for us to discuss. It's meant for you, if you're interested in that part, to read yourself. I can send you the PDF. Anybody at American TESOL Institute, any student or anyone affiliated, or if you share the link with someone, if you're an American TESOL Institute student and you share it, anybody is welcome to email me for the PDF and any information. Let's talk about test center conditions. What does that mean, and why is that important? Well, maybe you can imagine, some people understand this right away. Some people feel doesn't really make a difference, right? And some people really need to experience it to believe it. So here, I'll tell you a story, which I think it's a good way to get into it. So years ago, when I started teaching TOEFL in New York City, I had a Japanese student I was teaching privately, and she was doing very well on the listening tests that she would do at home and bring back to our sessions. But she was doing horribly on the real test. So inexperienced, naive as I was, I didn't think to ask her until I finally realized I needed to ask her how she was taking the test when she was at home. And she said, "Oh, well, when I take the listening test at home, I do my laundry." I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I got my headphones on. I'm sorting my clothes. I'm doing my laundry. I do it at the same time. And I said, okay. And I'm starting to maybe get it, right? I think, well, how do you feel when you do the laundry and you're taking the test? She's like, oh, I feel so relaxed. That's why I like to do it that way. I thought, oh my God. I think you know what I'm talking about now. Another story is people who say, the best way to prepare for a test is to study for the test in the same room as you're going to take the test. The basic thing here is this. Most students, in my experience, whether it's intentionally or not, prepare in ways that are not good when they're taking a test. Now, if you're reviewing vocabulary, you're doing whatever, that's fine. You should be relaxed. But when you're taking test practice, so when I say practice, I mean timed. So students aren't always timing themselves. No food, no phone, no stop, get up, come back, right? No lounging on the bed. Because so many times students tell me when they get to the test center and they're sitting in at their little table, or at their little, computer area, cubicle or whatever, they start to feel really stressed. And feeling stressed before the test, all the way till you're sitting down, is normal. We always talk about this. But when you start, you should be able to relax and focus. Now, not totally relax, right? But you should feel like, okay, this is just another, right? You're in your zone because you've been in that zone before. So that is so important. Maybe not for everybody, but I've met students that don't think it's that important and have learned the hard way that it is really important. So, for example, I just put this here for example, if they're not using answer sheets, if it's paper-based, uh, that is not real test conditions, and that happens a lot. Students just writing their answers on paper or on their phone. And it's my belief that you might think I'm crazy, but it's my belief that one of the reasons ETS continues to do paper-based is that, in fact, students make a lot of mistakes on paper-based, and it keeps them coming back and paying for the test. I think it'd be much easier for them to do it computer-based at this point. They are moving in that direction, however. Whether or not that's true, what I do know is that there are many students, unfortunately some of mine, who've come back to me and realized when their score is so low that, oh, they put the answers on the wrong line, and then they were messed up and they had to go back and erase, or they didn't even notice, or they didn't fill in the bubble completely, or they didn't erase one completely, and this brought down their score. So just another example of and just feeling comfortable with this. I tell them, in the United States, we start bubbling answers when we're 5 or 6 years old. It's like it's in our culture. It's part of our DNA. Self-correction procedure. Wow, this is so important. And this is something that I didn't start out doing with students right away, but I did pretty early on. And it's made a world of difference, I'm sure. And this is another one, another thing that, like the last tip about using test center practice, like practicing like the real test under the conditions of the real test, something that many students don't do. So what I'm talking about here, imagine, I mean, I have some slides to show you, but before we move on here. So imagine taking a practice test, going to the answer key, okay? And what do you do? So the thing most people do is, if you chose A, but the correct answer is C. So you mark it wrong and you mark the correct answer, C. So now you know the correct answer is C. So you're marking correct answers, but that's not good because you did not go back to try to find the correct answer. You just saw the correct answer. So let me build on what I'm talking about here, right? This is what needs to happen. And it's, a no-brainer once you understand how important this is. So this is the correct way to do it. right? So this student got 16, 17, and 20 wrong. They don't know what the correct answer is. Right? So it's a little harder when you're on your own, but it's not that hard. You can just mark it and then go away and come back, right? You're not going to remember what answer was correct. But in class, what you can do with your students is read the answers and make sure that they are just marking right or wrong, and then alone or with a partner, go back in. Why? Why did they choose? So let's take number 16. Why did they choose? Why did you choose C? So the reflection is so important, right? There's the different reasons why you could get something wrong. You weren't focusing. Oh, yeah, of course it's not C, it's A. Or I have no idea what the answer is, right? B. D, right? Well, it's A. Oh, wow. So it was vocabulary or something with English, right? Messed you up. Or, I wanted to choose A and then I changed my answer. Ooh, that means you second guessed yourself, right? Or the opposite, right? I thought a really long time and then chose the wrong answer, right? So this is really, really important. And that reflection also connects directly to strategies. We're not going to talk about test strategies. Each test is different. But you can imagine, right? If you understand why you got it wrong, you can link that to strategies, especially for elimination strategies and things like that. So a very basic idea that I think that I know is often overlooked. Let's talk about vocabulary. So the reason I'm focusing on two vocabulary areas is because any standardized test for English proficiency is a good one, at least, is not going to be so grammar based. It's going to be much more vocabulary based. And the best ones are going to be based mainly on knowing collocations of a word and knowing the grammatical form of the word. So grammar in that sense, that's the next one. So we'll start with collocations. So this is from either IELTS or TOEFL, IBT. It could be from either academic English. I don't remember. It is definitely from one of them. Looks more like TOEFL, IBT to me. So you've got a reading like this. A good way to introduce collocations is to show students part of a reading like this and explain that it's not just individual vocabulary words that are important, right? It's how words go together, like word combinations, collocations. So maybe you could point out one of them, right? So how about, developed independently, right? Because we could have a verb like develop, but how many words are used to modify it? An adverb like developed how? Developed quickly, developed over time, like things like this, right? But you can get to it, you can show them if they're just introducing it the first time, you could just show them this, right? Okay, these are collocations. And these are these chunks, right? These word combinations are what you need to focus on when you're trying to build vocabulary and a vocabulary notebook and reviewing them, because these will occur again and again. The topics will change, right? And some collocations are not as useful because they're not they're very specified. So what I've done here, and you might think, well, how often are your students going to use domesticated crops? Well, not very often, probably, because TOEFL intentionally ETS makes the topics usually not interesting to students, not common for their future graduate work. Or studying abroad majors, but that's another story. But anyway, but for TOEFL collocations and IELTS academic domesticated crops, population concentrations, secure food supply. These will be used again and again. So they are not highlighted, but so this is something that you can do with students. And once they notice collocations, they notice these chunks, it will also help their reading fluency. But also because they'll get to a chunk and instead of dissecting it, oh, evidence of agriculture, drying up of the desert, right? They'll be able to really notice. For example, here's a great one. These people settled at first in scattered hunting and gathering bands. Oh, but settled in bands, settled in groups, settled in tribes. They'll be able to kind of see the chunks while they're reading. Then a test like TOEIC has collocation questions. In fact, these collocation questions and word form questions are the majority of questions in directly tested in parts 5 and 6 of the TOEIC. And then in the reading section also, just like we saw before, the most important information is going to be in chunks and collocations and the listening section. So this is really true across all the tests, right? But in TOEIC, what's special about TOEIC is that there are multiple choice questions that are just collocation questions. For example, number 111, customer satisfaction. If you know customer satisfaction is a high frequency expression, then it's not about logic as much. Could we say customer opportunity? It's not impossible, right? So a collocation question is not a grammar question because you could say, okay, noun, customer satisfaction, these are compound nouns. The others are not collocations. In other words, they're not frequent chunks. Parking is available. This is a pronoun question here. Here's a word form question. We're going to see those in a moment. But down here, here's another one. Right? The laptop made its debut. Right? So collocation questions to do better in reading and listening and writing yourself when you're producing English on a test like the IBT or IELTS or another. But also, well, I lost my train of thought there. But yes, also directly in certain tests like the TOEIC. And here's the problem. We are talking before about authentic materials, and or if you can't use authentic materials because ETS does not publish a collocation reference for the test, or even any vocabulary list. So you can go on the web and see things like this. There are two problems here. Well, there are more than two. The two big problems I see, and maybe looking at it, you can guess what I'm going to say. Your immediate thing might be there's no definition, but you can find a definition of something. The biggest problem here is this is not a high frequency list for TOEFL. So it's pretty arbitrary. How are these words chosen and put on a list? That's the big problem. And the second problem relates to collocation. There's no collocation. So yes, you can go find a collocation the way that you can find a definition, but it's a little harder actually because this is based on frequency. This is corpus linguistics, and these tests have their own corpus of language they use. So you really have to reverse engineer them yourself, which is what I do. Which I'll get to in a moment. Here's one for TOEIC. And listing the form of the verb, the other one did the form of the word without showing word forms, right? So here this one has, for some reason, examples for a few things. I guess when it could be have two different, well, not really. I don't know what's going on here. I know I pulled these two off the internet because they just show how bad this can be. But unfortunately, most of the lists are like this. I am building my own. This looks like another shameless promotion, but I'm not selling this stuff. So maybe one day. Anyway, I'm happy to share it with people if they get in touch with me. But basically, what I was saying about reverse engineering, I'm organizing this for my students based on materials either ETS materials or very, very close to ETS to give them, a better sense of what's on the test and to put it in a format where they can see the collocations. But you can do that yourself. You can have students collect them as they go, make their own notebooks, and that can be much more interesting way to build vocabulary for this test, right? So this is what it looks like. You can do the same thing. So, this is all a student has to do is basically find it and put it in, when they've seen it, and try to build vocabulary this way, not single words. Notice there's no definitions here. A student does not need a definition of achieve or advertise. What a student needs, right, is to know the collocations they can expect and the pronunciation when it's listening, which we're going to talk about soon. But first, word forms. So noun, verb, adjective, adverb are the four primary word forms, and then function words like prepositions. So same thing. This one is, I believe this is IELTS. Here are some words you could highlight and have students write down or tell you, or in groups, think about what other word forms are there. Okay, there's the verb advertise, advertising. Oh, pure, purify, purely, right? And sometimes they wouldn't have seen the connection because the word can really change. Like pure and purified, maybe that's not the best example. Fortunately, usually it's not so difficult to see the connections, but they might not know quickly, desirability, for example, or desire and desirable, those word families. So I say word forms, you could also call it word families. So clearly, when you start looking at this, you notice, there's word form, collocation go together. So if you're talking about, we see the collocations too, cleansing processes, microscopic membranes, undesirable materials, right? So it's a question, I feel, when you're building vocabulary, of knowing a collocation, like which words go together, and then knowing the most common forms of the words that you're going to see on these tests. And I mentioned, we saw, this is also TOEIC, just a different font, but we can see, let's see, number 105, that's a collocation question. I think this is from the sample questions in the handbook for TOEIC. So that's a collocation questions. We have two word form questions. Word form, definitely the most common. Collocation is right behind it. Together, word form and collocation questions make up more than half of the questions in part 5 and part 6 of the TOEIC. So unnecessarily complicated. So, and you could also say, well, what is that, a collocation? Yes, unnecessarily complicated. So that can go down as a collocation, but knowing, right, adverb and adjective or the participle, making the adjective. And here we have another one. What kind of learning? A regular learning. So adjective, noun. Okay, so I was about to talk more about TOEIC, but this is not a TOEIC webinar. Happy to have a TOEIC webinar if anybody wants one, or TOEFL or IELTS or any other test. So the thing is, you can do something like this. So I have this for students for reference, but something like this is not a way to learn them. Learning has to come through exposure, practice, games. I have word form games, right? Seeing a lot of the questions, even if they're not taking TOEIC, you could use TOEIC word form questions as a way to help build students familiarity, knowledge, and how quickly they can recognize these, because this, as I said, is a reference. So, oops, said I wasn't going to use the mouse. Right, so this is something that I recommend doing, because this is a little bit easy. You could take this and kind of move into a game, because here, for example, and this again is this is TOEIC. This is the real stuff. This is not just a random list of words off the internet. But if you've got, like, for example, accept, acceptance, acceptable, right? You could make a game or a quiz or something where they have to recognize that, or even better, you can find the ones that are in common. This is something I'm doing now, like all the ones that are BLE, accessible, acceptable, right? So and give them practice with those so they can really get used to, oh, those are adjectives. And knowing that it's called an adjective, noun, or a verb is not important during the test, but it's super important to get that knowledge back here to be able to answer things correctly. And, I showed you the TOEIC examples, but collocations, word forms are all over all of these tests and any good test. So we're at tip number 7. We haven't talked about pronunciation. Well, you might think, well, if it's a test that doesn't require speaking, do you need to practice stress and intonation? The answer is absolutely. And that's for the listening section. And it'll even help with the other sections. But more and more test schools and businesses, they want tests that have measure speaking. But remember, listening, which is on almost all of these tests, the biggest issue. This is not to remember now, unless you have experience with it. But the biggest issue for most students is not that they don't have know the vocabulary for the listening. It's that they don't recognize the words. So if they had a script, it would be easy peasy, right? So why is there this gap, right? This gulf often between what the student understands when the student reads and what the student understands when he or she listens. And the main reason is usually the rhythm, right? The word stress. So I'll just let you read this while I just say some basic things, which is, marking the stress yourself is so important. And getting students to mark stress in words is so important. And if they don't believe that it's a big deal, I'm sure an example of from any test you have where there are words that they think they know, you can ask them to do dictation and they won't catch them. So, words like cabinet, cabinet, merchandise. Depends on their first language, of course. So, I've taught mainly Asian students and French students. Asian students in New York City and French students in France. And French, Korean, Japanese, for example, they're so syllable timed that the stress is majorly important for listening comprehension. It'll also help their reading fluency as well, and certainly when they speak, to be understood. So word stress is where the syllable is stressed in the word, and sentence stress is where the words are stressed. And it's very interesting that English has this, 3 subject, verb, object pattern. And this is from part 1 of the TOEIC. Once students understand, oh, woman is reading magazine, people attending seminar, that is the natural stress in the sentence, it can change so much for them as far as what they need to focus on when they listen. So it's hugely important. Really easy if you're not a native speaker or an advanced speaker of English yourself, if you're not sure of where the stress is. And also native speakers and advanced speakers don't necessarily know or think about where the stress is. Audio dictionaries now, but also generative AI like ChatGPT is the best for this. It's just the most accurate. You can ask ChatGPT, and we're going to get to more on ChatGPT in a moment. So just some examples here where you can, this is TOEIC, but it didn't look like this. I did this. When do you want to work on this new project, right? Intonation, as I mentioned a moment ago, is much more about the feeling of the person, the more precise meaning of the sentence. So I always say, words stress is to me the most important, because without understanding stress, you won't understand anything. about, or you want to understand major parts of a sentence, but without intonation, you won't understand the feeling the person has, which can be directly related to what they want to do or want you to do. And then if you speak yourself without intonation, on a test, this is going to hurt your score, but in life also, you may be misunderstood. So here are some examples of how intonation works to signal a yes/no question, a WH question. Do you want to drive to the convention center, or would you like me to? Right. So there are particular patterns. The one at the end here is one of the most important, right? So who's going to do it? I thought you were going to do it. No, Tina said that she would do it. So marking stress and intonation, and then doing shadowing and dictation exercises to practice with it. So let me explain what that is. I have something that I created that you may want to try yourself, or it may inspire you to do something yourself. So let me explain it while you read it. So shadowing is when you basically mimic, right, what you hear a person say. So I do mention here, this is a test practice version, to use listening material that you've done before, right? So you don't want your brain to have to think about what it means. You know what it means. You know the correct answer on the test, right? So it's like that declarative procedural driving the car idea, right? Your brain is not thinking anymore about what the person means. You understand it. You did this on a test. So you are now listening to focus on your listening skill entirely, especially the sounds, right? So what you do, you listen, pause, and repeat. Very simple, right? While reading the script. And then here's an example. This is part 4 of TOEIC. But then you can also do dictation. It's the same idea, but you stop, instead of repeating, shadowing, you stop and you write. Another version of this is writing just the stressed words. So you could write down what you hear, you could write down the stressed words. As you see here, you could compare with a partner. Actually, no, I didn't say that, but you can do this. I said compare your work with the audio script. Yes, you could also compare with somebody if you do this in class, but this is most valuable as something you do at home. You don't have enough time in class to do this. Students who really struggle with listening, for English listening, this is really, it takes time, but it can have a profound effect on students' listening ability when they can listening skills when they do dictation like this. Speaking and writing sections. In life, we don't want to just repeat the same template style structure when we answer some questions or we write something. But on a test, when you don't have a lot of time and stress is an issue, and it's your second language, a foreign language, and certainly to begin with, you want to start with a template. You want to start with something that is designed to answer the question to make sure you are doing it the right way. That's the minimum. But also, if your English skills, meaning the students' English skills, are not so strong, then you also need a template not only to make sure you're answering correctly, but to get enough repetitive practice with certain words, like connecting words, for example, maybe the most important, so that when you take the test, you're able to produce that. So let me show you what I mean. So this is TOEFL, where you are giving your personal opinion about something. Learning through online courses is more effective than learning in the traditional classroom setting. So by template, I mean something like this. So this is something I made, which there's so many similar ones, because again, if you see what TOEFL wants you to do for this, what is the minimum? How should it be structured, right? So obviously, if you your English level, again, the student's English level is up here, then you're going to be able to make longer sentences. But even if your level is not so high, you're down here, you can follow something like this. And even if your answer is short, you are going to do well enough because you answered with correct format and connecting words like I have here. So here's an example. So this is where when we get to the speaking and writing part, I'm going to go pretty quickly just to give you the idea. I think the idea is pretty obvious of helping them with a template. And then if you want the PDF, support at fluentcmc.com. Again, support at fluentcmc.com. I'm happy to send this to you if you want to take a closer look at it. And this last tip connects with the one we just talked about with templates, because generative AI, ChatGPT is the most famous, and then Gemini and Claude and God knows how many more there are now, and they just keep getting better and better. You can use this for the templates as well, but go further to getting sample essays for the writing sections of tests, and using it for students to submit their essays and get feedback. So if you're not convinced yet as a teacher of how AI could be a good tool for your students, this will really change your mind, because when it comes to things that are very formulaic, this is what generative AI excels at. So if you're talking about more creative things, that's a little more complicated sometimes, although there are amazing things you can do with ChatGPT for being creative. But the point is, these, whether it's answering questions about a graph for Cambridge, for IELTS, we saw earlier, or it's writing a response in the listening on the TOEFL IBT, for example, where you listen to a professor speak, you read something, listen to a professor, and you've got to show contrast between them. This is stuff you can feed into generative AI. I would do that. I wouldn't just say, this is for the TOEFL, this is for IELTS. I don't presume that it's going to work that so well that way. But you tell them the task, you give them a sample, give them a sample from the company, right? Like if you get a sample, there are definitely enough samples for TOEFL essay and speaking responses and IELTS that you could feed those. This would be what I suggest, and I've done. Feed those to generative AI a little by little, right? So you're just going to do one thing. Here's an essay. Could you give me more sample essays? Or I'm going to give you a student's essay, or the student could submit it. Could you compare this to the style? What would you recommend? Would you rewrite it for us? Would you tell us about your changes? So here's an example. Writing task 2 of the IELTS. Academic essay, argumentative essay, basically. Copy and paste this, give it to ChatGPT, for example. That's what I did. And I'm just going to flick through this, right? Here's what the essay we got. And in the past, what would you do? You'd go on the internet and look for sample essays, but they're never going to be as good as this. Plus, you can ask for it to be shorter, for it to be longer, for it to be, more academic, less academic. My student, hey, ChatGPT, that was great, but my students are lower level. Can you make that simpler? English. Here's one. Should governments ban their citizens from using TikTok? This time, I put the student's essay here, right? You can see there are mistakes, spelling, syntax, grammar, etc. And I said it's for a beginner student, please use simple English. So students can do this themselves, or you can help them. This is now ChatGPT's version. So you can look at this here. Look what you can do. Identify changes and why you made them. So students can ask for this. You can give them the prompts, or you can give students an assignment where they have to understand these mistakes and explain them to you, either in a message to you, or if you have the time to meet with them quickly in class. Here is another example. So these I have here, like I said, if you want to, if you're interested in this, I'm doing a lot right now with ChatGPT and writing and speaking. I'm focusing on the writing here, but you can also do speaking. And now that there is more opportunity to use voice with AI, you can do really cool things. I want to do a webinar on that soon. I'm waiting because it's not quite here yet, or it's best in the paid versions of things, but soon it's going to be free to be able to chat and have a really natural conversation, and also could be an academic conversation with generative AI. So I'm really excited about that. My friends, we've come to the end of our hour, the end of our webinar, the end of the top 10 tips for stress-free test preparation. I hope you enjoyed it. And please always remember, practice builds accuracy. Practices the templates, the repetition, right? The exposure to the vocabulary, the getting to know the test, right? The playing games to know the tests and to know the content of the tests. Then students are more confident. We'll also put here more relaxed, focused. That builds the fluency. They need to be more creative in the language. And finally, I know it's not always possible with test prep, but if you bring games in or you bring raps in, that's something else I can help you with for test preparation. I think your students will enjoy some of that. And as we all know, what we learn with pleasure, we never forget. Thanks so much to all of you. If you're here live, stick around. I'll answer the questions you have in the chat. If you're watching the recording, thank you. Please share it out. And good luck to all American TESOL Institute teachers and other teachers, all of you everywhere. Take care. Thanks so much. Have a great day wherever you are. Peace, respect. Bye-bye.